For 3 endless weeks, the mountains have been swallowed by ice. In the middle of that frozen silence, Sarah Miller sat by her cabin window until something impossible appeared in the storm. A massive grizzly bear, half buried in snow, dragged itself toward her porch, its breath rising in clouds of pain. At first, Sarah froze, thinking it might attack. But then she saw it. One paw lifted, trembling, covered in blood and ice. The bear wasn't hunting. It was begging for help. And in that instant, Sarah's world and heart would never be the same. The thermometer outside Sarah's cabin hadn't climbed above 0 in weeks. The winter storms of 2024 had turned Montana's wilderness into a white graveyard where even the strongest creatures struggled to survive. From her small wooden home, surrounded by towering pines, Sarah watched the world vanish beneath another layer of falling snow. At 43, she had grown used to solitude, the kind that hummed quietly through the wind. Her only companions were the deer that wandered near her porch and the jays that tapped against her window, begging for crumbs of bread. That morning had been like any other. The fire crackled, coffee brewed, and Sarah's old radio hummed with static. But something in the air felt different, tense, almost listening. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. When she stepped outside to refill the bird feeder, the silence pressed against her ears so hard it hurt. No birds, no wind, just the faint groan of distant trees bending under ice. Then she saw it, a dark shape stumbling through the snow, far beyond her property line. At first, she thought it was a fallen tree or a trick of the light. But the movement, slow, uneven, made her chest tighten. The deer scattered in panic, vanishing into the woods. That was never a good sign. Sarah ran back inside, grabbed her binoculars, and pressed them to her eyes. Her breath fogged the glass. The shape came into focus, and her heart stopped. It was a bear, a massive grizzly, its fur caked in frost, moving with a terrible slowness. Bears were supposed to be hibernating. They didn't wander through blizzards unless something was very, very wrong. Each step it took looked painful. The snow around it was marked with spots of red blood. Sarah's instinct screamed at her to lock the doors, close the curtains, and wait for it to pass. But something about the way it moved stopped her. It wasn't charging or growling. It looked tired, lost. When the creature reached the edge of her porch light, Sarah could finally see its eyes, glazed, sunken, and full of something she didn't expect to see in a predator. Fear. The bear's body shivered violently as it lowered itself into the snow. Then, with a trembling paw, it pressed against her porch step as if asking for entry. Sarah's mind raced. Every survival book she had ever read said never approach an injured wild animal. But as she stood frozen at her window, watching the creature's labored breathing fade in the cold, she realized something deeper than fear was rising inside her. Compassion. And in that moment, Sarah understood. This bear hadn't come to harm her. It had come to her because it no longer had anywhere else to go. Sarah stood motionless, her pulse thundering louder than the wind outside. The bear was close enough now that she could see its breath misting in the frigid air, every exhale weaker than the last. Its fur, thick with ice, shimmered faintly under the porch light like shards of glass frozen in time. She pressed a trembling hand against the window, torn between instinct and empathy. This wasn't just any wild creature. It was dying right in front of her. Her first thought was to call for help. But the phone lines had been dead for days, and her radio sputtered with nothing but static. The nearest ranger station was 20 miles away, buried under snow and fallen trees. There was no one coming. Whatever decision she made tonight would be hers alone. The bear let out a sound, a low, guttural whine that didn't belong in any wilderness guidebook. It was the sound of pain, of surrender. Sarah's breath hitched as she saw the animal's injured paw raised slightly, the skin around it darkened and swollen with frostbite. Each tremor in its body seemed to whisper one silent plea. Help me. For a moment, she thought of her grandfather, the man who taught her everything about life in these mountains. He'd always said nature wasn't cruel or kind. It was simply honest. But he'd also said, sometimes the wild tests us to see what kind of heart we carry. And tonight, Sarah felt that test pounding in her chest. She moved quickly but cautiously, gathering blankets, her emergency kit, and a metal basin for warm water. Her hand shook so hard she nearly dropped them. This is insane, she told herself. It's a grizzly bear. One wrong move, and her name would become a headline about a woman who thought compassion could tame the wilderness. Still, she couldn't ignore what she'd seen in those eyes. They weren't wild with rage. They were heavy with exhaustion. Sarah slipped in her thickest coat, pulled on her boots, and opened the door just a crack. A gust of icy wind tore through the cabin, burning her skin. The bear didn't move. Its massive head hung low, eyes half shut, as if too tired to react. Sarah's voice trembled as she whispered into the night. "Hey, big guy, you're not going to hurt me, are you?" The only reply was the slow rise and fall of its chest. She stepped onto the porch, her breath coming in sharp clouds. The boards creaked beneath her boots. Every survival instinct screamed to turn back, to shut the door, to pretend she hadn't seen this. But she kept walking, stopping just a few feet away. The bear's head lifted slightly. Their eyes met, and in that silent moment, something passed between them, an understanding that words could never explain. Sarah knelt, setting down the basin and thermos of warm water. "It's okay," she whispered. "Let's fix that paw." The bear shifted slightly, letting out another soft moan. Then, to her astonishment, it lifted the frostbitten paw toward her as though it understood. Sarah's tears blurred her vision. With careful hands, she poured the warm water over the ice-crusted fur. The bear flinched but didn't pull away. As the ice melted, red welts and blistered skin appeared beneath. Painful but alive. The wind howled around them, but Sarah barely noticed. She was too focused on the fragile miracle unfolding before her. A creature of raw power surrendering itself to human kindness. And as the water dripped into the snow, steaming faintly in the cold, Sarah realized this wasn't about saving a wild animal anymore. It was about rediscovering what it meant to be human in a world that had forgotten compassion. The night deepened around the cabin, the snow falling thicker now, swallowing every sound except the steady rhythm of Sarah's breath and the faint, trembling huffs from the bear. Her hands burned from the cold, but she kept working, pouring warm water gently over the animal's paw until the last of the ice melted away. Beneath the frost, she saw raw skin, angry red and blistered, but alive. That meant there was still time. When the final shards of ice slid from its fur, Sarah sat back on her heels, watching steam rise from the paw. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to reassure the bear or herself. The bear's eyes, dark and glassy, met hers again. There was no aggression, no fear, just quiet endurance. It was strange. She'd always known grizzlies to be forces of nature, untamed and terrifying. Yet this one, beaten by the storm, seemed fragile in its suffering. It shifted slightly, lowering its head as though in gratitude. The sight made Sarah's throat tighten. She looked at the snow piling up around them. If the bear stayed out here, it would freeze before morning. She had two choices: let it die in the cold, or find a way to shelter it without risking her own life. Neither option felt right, but one felt unbearable. Her mind raced through possibilities. The cabin was too small, and letting a full-grown bear inside was madness. But the old garage, detached, sturdy, with a heavy steel door, could work. It was warmer than outside and safe enough to keep a barrier between them if things went wrong. Sarah took a deep breath, stood slowly, and spoke softly, as if explaining her plan to the bear. "I'm going to open the garage for you, okay? It's warm in there. You'll be safe." She didn't expect a response, but the bear lifted its head slightly, as if it understood the tone of her voice. Inside, Sarah moved fast. She laid down old blankets, dragged a propane heater to one corner, and pushed aside tools that could be dangerous. Her hands shook from adrenaline, but her thoughts were clear. If this creature had trusted her enough to ask for help, she owed it safety. When she returned to the porch, the bear hadn't moved much. Its breathing was shallow now. She stepped closer, whispering, "Come on, big one. Just a little farther." She pressed the button for the garage door, the motor word echoing through the storm. The bear's ears twitched at the unfamiliar sound, and for a moment Sarah's heart stopped. If it panicked now, everything would be lost. But instead, it simply turned its head toward the noise. The door rose halfway, revealing the faint orange glow of the heater and the soft blankets waiting inside. Warm air spilled out, carrying the scent of safety. The bear blinked slowly, then, with visible effort, began to move. Each step left deep prints in the snow, a trail of blood fading behind it. Sarah held her breath as the massive creature reached the threshold. For a long moment, it just stood there, half in light, half in shadow, like something out of a dream. Then it limped forward, one slow, deliberate step at a time, into the warmth of the garage. It sank down heavily onto the blankets, releasing a sound that was half a sigh, half a groan. The relief was almost human. Sarah watched, motionless, as the bear's muscles relaxed, its breathing steadied, and its eyes fluttered closed. For several seconds, she couldn't move. She had just let a grizzly bear into her home. The absurdity of it hit her in waves, but so did an overwhelming sense of peace. She had done what compassion demanded, and in return, the wild had given her trust. She stepped closer, careful to keep her distance, and set down a small bowl of stew near the bear's head. The rich scent drifted through the air, and a moment later, the creature's nose twitched. It didn't eat, but Sarah could tell it recognized the gesture. She smiled faintly. As the heater hummed and the storm howled outside, Sarah finally sat down on the floor a few feet away. The fear that had once gripped her heart had faded into something else. Wonder. She thought of her grandfather again, of all the nights he'd told her that the mountains had a way of revealing who you truly were. Maybe this was that moment for her. She stayed there for hours, watching the rise and fall of the bear's chest, listening to the soft rhythm of its breathing blending with the storm. Every few minutes, she'd whisper something, words of comfort, gratitude, or just quiet awe. At some point, she realized she wasn't talking to an animal anymore. She was talking to a soul that had trusted her completely. When dawn finally broke, the snow had stopped. Light filtered through the frosted windows, painting the bear's fur in a pale, golden hue. Sarah wrapped a blanket tighter around herself and whispered, "You made it." The bear stirred, eyes blinking open briefly, and let out a low, rumbling sound, a sound that felt less like pain and more like thanks. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt she wasn't alone in the mountains anymore. The following days blurred together in a rhythm of care, worry, and quiet miracles. Outside, the mountains remained locked in their frozen silence. But inside Sarah's small cabin and makeshift garage shelter, a fragile heartbeat of life pulsed on. The bear, Sarah had begun calling her Luna after the pale winter moon, slept for nearly 2 days straight. Sarah barely left her side. She refilled the heater, changed melted snow buckets, and whispered softly whenever Luna stirred. The fear that had once wrapped around her heart had melted away, replaced by something deeper, responsibility and awe. When Luna finally woke, her dark eyes found Sarah immediately. They held no threat, no hunger, just quiet recognition. She tried to move, but her body trembled violently, her frostbitten paw refusing to bear weight. Sarah's instincts kicked in. "Easy," she murmured, crouching beside her. "You're safe now." Using her grandfather's journal as reference, she began treating Luna's injuries the only way she knew how: patience, warmth, and care. She warmed small towels in hot water, wrapping them around the injured paw, checking every few minutes to make sure the temperature was right. Luna never growled, never pulled away. She simply watched. On the third day, Sarah finally reached Dr. Wilson, a regional wildlife veterinarian, through her emergency radio. The connection crackled with static, but his disbelief came through clearly. "You what? You're treating a grizzly bear in your garage." "I didn't plan it," Sarah replied, her voice shaking from exhaustion. "She came to me. She would have died if I hadn't." There was silence, then a long sigh. "Keep her warm. Hydrate her. I'll get there as soon as the road's clear. By the time Dr. Wilson arrived 3 days later, Luna had made remarkable progress. Her breathing was steady, and she had started nibbling on bits of food, mostly honey and softened vegetables. When the doctor stepped into the garage, Luna lifted her head but didn't growl. Her gaze followed him calmly, as if she somehow understood he was there to help. Dr. Wilson's eyes widened. "She's trusting you," he whispered, astonished. "That's not normal bear behavior. You've built a connection she shouldn't even be capable of." Sarah smiled faintly, her hand hovering just above Luna's head, but never touching. "She trusted me first." The next few weeks unfolded like a slow thaw. The storm outside began to ease, and sunlight returned, glinting through the pines. Inside, Sarah worked tirelessly. Every day, she changed Luna's bandages, massaged her paw to restore circulation, and spoke to her as though she were speaking to an old friend. Sometimes she read aloud from her grandfather's journals, stories of the mountains, of creatures that had crossed paths with him in his youth. Luna listened. She would rest her head on the blankets, eyes half closed, her massive chest rising and falling in rhythm with Sarah's words. When Sarah stopped reading, Luna would often release a low, contented huff, a sound that reminded Sarah of gratitude. When Dr. Wilson returned for follow-up visits, his amazement grew. He began documenting everything: Luna's recovery, her behavior, her responsiveness to human presence. "This isn't just rehabilitation," he told Sarah one afternoon, scribbling notes in his pad. "This is a form of emotional intelligence we've never recorded in grizzlies before. It's like she knows you saved her." As Luna's health returned, so did her strength. One morning, Sarah entered the garage to find Luna sitting upright, supporting her weight on all fours for the first time. Her eyes sparkled with vitality. "Well, look at you," Sarah whispered, tears prickling her eyes. "Back on your feet." Luna's response was a soft, deep rumble, gentle, almost musical. Then, in a gesture that left Sarah breathless, the bear lowered her head slightly, bowing it as if acknowledging her. From that day forward, their bond deepened. Luna began following Sarah's movements around the garage, watching her fix the heater or prepare food. She'd tilt her head curiously when Sarah talked, as if trying to understand every word. When Sarah laughed, Luna made a low, rhythmic sound that almost resembled laughter in return. Dr. Wilson was stunned. "She's mimicking your emotional responses," he said during one visit. "She's not just surviving, she's connecting." The transformation wasn't only in Luna. Sarah felt it too. The loneliness that had weighed her down for years, the silence of winters spent alone, had softened into purpose. For the first time in her life, she woke each morning knowing someone depended on her. But with every passing week, one truth grew clearer: Luna couldn't stay forever. Her strength was returning, her fur thick again, her paw healed enough to walk naturally. She belonged to the wilderness, not to the walls of a human home. Sarah knew it, yet the thought of losing her companion made her chest ache. One evening, as golden light filled the cabin, Sarah sat beside Luna, reading aloud the last page of her grandfather's journal. His words felt prophetic now. Nature's greatest mysteries come disguised as choices. The right one always feels like love and fear at the same time. Tears blurred her eyes. She looked at Luna, who was watching her with that same patient stillness she'd shown the first night. "You'll be ready soon, won't you?" she whispered. "To go back." Luna shifted, her great body rising slightly before lowering again. A deep exhale left her chest, a sound so soft, so mournful it felt like goodbye. When Dr. Wilson visited again the next morning, Sarah finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. "When should I let her go?" He looked at Luna, then at Sarah. "When you know she doesn't need you anymore. But don't be surprised if she decides she still wants to see you." Over the next week, Sarah left the garage door open for longer periods. Luna began venturing to the threshold, sniffing the cold air, watching the snow melt into soft puddles under the sun. She never strayed far, always returning to the blankets by dusk. One morning, Sarah woke to find the garage empty. Panic shot through her chest until she spotted deep paw prints leading into the woods. Luna had gone. Sarah stood at the edge of the trees, her breath trembling in the morning chill. "Goodbye, Luna," she whispered, voice breaking. "Thank you for trusting me." For a long while, the forest remained silent. Then, far in the distance, a deep, resonant growl echoed through the pines, a sound that wasn't warning but recognition. A farewell. And in that moment, Sarah realized she hadn't lost Luna at all. She had simply set her free. Spring melted the last traces of winter from the valley, and life slowly returned to the mountains. Sarah tried to settle back into her old routine. Morning coffee, work by the fire, and quiet evenings surrounded by the sounds of the forest. But the silence now felt different. It wasn't loneliness anymore, it was memory. Every creak of the cabin reminded her of Luna. Sometimes, at night, she'd catch herself glancing toward the garage door, half expecting to hear that soft, familiar huff. The bond they had shared was impossible to forget. Luna hadn't just survived the winter. She had changed Sarah's world entirely. Weeks passed. One morning, as sunlight spilled across the porch, Sarah stepped outside with her coffee and froze. At the edge of the forest, a massive shadow moved between the trees. Her heart leapt. It couldn't be, but it was. Luna. The bear emerged slowly into the clearing, her fur now full and golden under the spring sun. She looked stronger, radiant even, a living symbol of everything Sarah had fought for that frozen night. And in her mouth, Luna carried something, an uneven, dripping honeycomb. Sarah covered her mouth, tears stinging her eyes as Luna padded closer. With a gentle motion, the bear placed the honeycomb at the bottom of the porch steps, just as she had once rested her injured paw there months ago. Then she sat, calm and regal, her intelligent eyes fixed on Sarah's. For a long, breathless moment, neither of them moved. Sarah knelt slowly, smiling through her tears. "You remembered," she whispered. Luna made a low, soft sound, somewhere between a growl and a sigh, and then stood. She turned toward the forest, pausing just long enough to glance back one last time before disappearing into the trees. Sarah stayed there for a long while, the honeycomb glistening in the morning light beside her. It wasn't just a gift. It was a thank you, a reminder of a trust that had crossed the boundary between two worlds. That night, as the stars blinked awake over the mountains, Sarah opened her grandfather's journal one last time and wrote, "Some bonds don't need words. They only need a moment of courage and a heart willing to listen." And somewhere deep in the forest, a grizzly's gentle breath echoed through the pines.